Right.
if you're not giving with a joyful heart, then like actually don't give at all.
Am I doing that because I'm greedy and I want to reach a certain number and get rich? Or am I doing that because I can do more with this tool? Because money is a tool. And that transition from viewing money as like the key to what I need and using it as a tool, just like a hammer, has been monumental. You can't be hollow and selfish and grow something beautiful with your family.
Yeah.
And beyond that, whenever we have something kind of like weird happen that's unpredictable and we're like blessed with money, ironically, there's always a need that comes up at the same time, and it just feels like God's kind of timing.
Why do you think secret giving is so important?
It's the only kind of giving that is truly of a pure heart.
Welcome to the Formed by Jesus podcast. We are in season 6. We're in the generosity practice. And so now we are in the part of the journey where we interview people from our church. I hope that you've noticed this. We're trying to reach people interview people at different stages of life, different stages of maturity, different backgrounds. We have a lot of people grew up in the church, a lot of people who didn't grow up in church, a lot of people who are doing great financially, a lot of people who are not doing great financially for the generosity practice. So really enjoy just to show off different people in our church. And today, I'm so excited. We have the man, the myth, the legend, Brett.
Hello. How are you guys?
So it's Brett Kuhn?
Brett Kuhn.
I've been saying it that way this whole time. And
you got
just
it right
like,
the first time, which is awesome. Because
so
most people call me Cone. So
interesting.
Yeah.
I was about to say, I don't know if I had another option. I was just like, I don't know if it is Kuhn.
I've heard Kuhn. I've heard Cone. That's usually pretty popular.
That one makes a little more sense to me.
Yeah, German pronunciation, you can say Kuhn. But that's not what I say.
Good for the sinuses.
I'm American, so.
So you own your own business?
Yes. Yeah. Myself and my brother own a business together. We do automotive detailing as well as automotive reconditioning for dealerships. So we've been doing that for almost 11 years now.
Wow, 11 years.
Yeah, it's like pretty much all that I've done. I started when I was 15 doing that for a company in Tucson, actually.
Okay.
And then I did that for about 3 years. And then my brother was like, hey, we should do something together. We love working together. Let's just jump out on a limb. So when I was still a teenager, we went out and started doing it. And honestly, we were just super blessed because looking back, it shouldn't have worked. And then and then it did.
I say that about our church all the time.
Yeah. Like if I knew now if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have taken that jump because like statistically it wasn't supposed to work. But it did. And it's been a huge blessing for us.
Yes, man, I so relate to that. So I started young too, pastoring, lead pastor. And it's like, and you would agree to this, you're so much better today now because you did that.
Oh, for sure.
But like, why in the world did I do that?
Yeah, that's so scary. Like, wow, I couldn't do that now. Wife and children. And
yeah, don't you miss some of that, just that naivete that comes from being a young man?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that boldness that can't be replicated because now there's too much. You spent your whole life building something of substance, and now that you have it, you can't take risks like that because it's too much.
Very true.
So it's when you have nothing that you can do cool stuff like that.
Which probably, can eventually get to our generosity talk. Because I think some people think, they can be generous later on in life. Sure. But you actually have more and more to lose as you build things.
Yeah, I think it actually gets harder, the more that you have. Because everything becomes a part of this bigger house of cards. And you don't want to knock any piece over.
Yes.
It becomes less stable. Not technically. I think practically speaking, you do get more stable over time.
Right.
But it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, well, because you're always adding people to the list that you're helping too, though, right? So, Lord willing, you have grandkids. Well, all of a sudden, now some of that wiggle room, I need to help them and that.
Right.
And what a beautiful thing to do. But yeah, there's always somebody. There's always a reason. So let's just dive right into it. I've just really enjoyed the conversations that I've had with you. I do want, as I start out, as I was thinking through, praying through, who do we interview? It's kind of hard to pick. We have some great people.
Amazing people.
And I'm also worried about like, how come I didn't get picked? So like, we're starting to go into that territory. So if I haven't picked you yet, I don't know.
Give it time. Give it
time. But your name came to my mind because I first of all, I've enjoyed our conversations. We've had a few at BlackRock and here and there before and after church. And being a pastor, I have the wonderful opportunity of, I think, seeing people's generosity in ways that other people would not be able to see. So that's a fun thing that I get to do. Just, conversations with people. I'm able to just like dissect and discern, this person's like really giving. And so I just have found you to be a generous person. And so I just really wanted to interview you because I think you're a good example of when we were thinking through what does Formed by Generosity look like? Who are the people we're trying to form? You are a really great example of that. So tell me your story. I'm very interested. Did you grow up, first of all, in a Christian household, and was generosity a way of life, or is that something you've really had to grow into?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't really thought about it through that frame, but growing up, we were relatively low income. My family was, Christian for sure. We went to church, but I wouldn't say we were like practicing Christians, right? Like we were kind of Sunday Christians. I grew up in the South, so it was very like, there's a culture in the South of like, you're Christian, so you go to church on Sunday, but like as soon as church was over, it was like, cool, back to the house to kind of do whatever we want, right? We didn't do any kind of practices. It wasn't like practice based. It was more of like just kind of a habit and kind of a social thing. That being said, my parents are wonderful people and they were pretty generous.
Right.
And so it was always culturally, something that we believed in. I think, tithe for me, if that's kind of part of generosity, has always been core. It's been very easy because my parents were always about, tithe and it's like what we're supposed to do according to the Bible. So that was always really easy. Generosity beyond that was always situational. So growing up, if my parents were in a good spot, we would absolutely help other people out.
Sure.
Very giving of their time when available. But like financially, it was always kind of tough to give. It always kind of felt like we were on the back foot most of the time, you know? And so I think seeing that with my folks, it was really clear that giving was something that we should be doing. But like how to go about doing it was always kind of tough because it's like there's always a need. There's a need within our family. There's a need within our kind of extended family. And then there's needs of the people that we see out in the world. And you always kind of have to like make a choice. It's like I can't help everyone. I can't be everything for everyone.
Yeah, don't you like when like when I walk downtown, I feel so guilty. It's like I can't give all these people all that they need.
Right.
And so when you walk by one, you're like, oh, I'm a terrible person.
Yeah. And like, what do they really need? You know, like, is it like, do they need money? Do they need like a hug and a conversation? Like, what do they actually need? Do they even want help? Because a lot of times, you see somebody in need. There's a certain point of poverty, I think, where people are really accepting of a conversation. But when you're kind of like on that edge, where you're like, your pride is still kind of in the way where you're like in a bad spot, but you don't want anyone to know. And you almost get offended if somebody tries to help you. You're like, no, I can figure this out myself. And so
true.
If you really care about people, when you see that, you're like, hey, I don't want to just make an assumption. Like I see this person's probably struggling, but if I go up and offer help, that means that their character is being questioned, that like, they can't keep up that facade. And so they might get hurt or offended from that too. So there's always like, in my mind, there's always that approach too.
Yeah, we actually kind of, that's what we face the most within our congregation. Because we're in our area, as you know, but I'm just saying the obvious out loud. We don't have a ton of homeless. That's not where we're at. But we do have people that are struggling more than you'd imagine.
Right.
Yeah. And so you have to really keep an eye out. And I mean, I get it. Like it'd be so hard to ask for help, Right.
Yeah. My pride gets in the way all the time with stuff. I'm notoriously stubborn when it comes to time. Like I'll accept help in a lot of different ways, but when someone's like, hey, I'm going to take time out of my day to go help you, I always say no. With the exception of my brother, because we have this like working relationship, but in general, I'm like, no, like I'm going to move by myself. Right. I'm going to like unload a truckload of rock, just one shovel at a time because I'm stubborn and I just don't like to ask for help. Right.
Man, we can dissect that, but I'll let that go by. Okay,
this is going to become a therapy session.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. No, I'm not good enough at that. So fairly generous home. Tithe was we're living off, like that's
just a thing.
That's a thing that we do. And so your parents did a good job of communicating this is what we do.
Right.
So that's pretty incredible. So you even said like not necessarily practicing Christians, but that's a practice.
It is, but I think
I knew what you meant by it, but to give them credit.
For sure. No, they're awesome.
Yeah.
That being said, though, like tithe to me was something that we did out of obligation. And so that's why in the previous statement I said if you connect those two, because to me tithe and generosity weren't inherently connected. Tithing was not generosity; it was a requirement. It's like cool, you go to church, you tithe, it's all God's money, you get to keep 90%. But there was very little heart behind it, where it was like, hey, this is us receiving something and then giving back to God's kingdom. It was like cool, God gets 100, we get the 90. It was like a deal, it's like, cool, you got your piece, I got mine, we can kind of move on. Not that there was negativity, but there certainly wasn't a heart of generosity behind that until I got older.
Yeah, and Paul says that in 2 Corinthians, he wants you to give joyfully. And if you're not giving with a joyful heart, then like actually don't give at all. Like there needs to be this.
Right.
Yeah, so you're pointing to that, the heartbeat of like, hey, let's be generous and be meaningful about it. And there's a sense of joy behind it not my obligation.
Right. And we touched on that recently with the Pharisees, right? Where they go to the temple and they give, but they're not, they're ignoring the people on the street. It's kind of the same thing. It's about the heart, not
Luke
the
11.
actual action.
Luke 11. Okay. So then you said later on, so now, you're in your mind now, you're thinking like you're out of the house. What does generosity look like for you?
Yeah. So my life is kind of broken up into like two phases. And so I always think of everything as like early and kind of now. Like the early phase, we lived in the South. I lived in Atlanta. I grew up over there. We moved back to Arizona when I was like 14, to take care of some family members down in Tucson. And at that point, that's when I kind of like came into my own as a person. My family was really busy and there was a lot of stuff going on kind of in the background. So I kind of felt like from that point forward, I kind of took my life into my own hands and kind of ran with it. And from that point, from like 14 to like 22, I wasn't a practicing Christian at all. I didn't tithe and I didn't go to church. And I didn't really, I had nothing negative about it. It wasn't like a church hurt situation. It was more just kind of self-focused, right? Like I wanted to do my own thing and move out and become something. And so I was really trying for that. And I just kind of lost track of it. And so tithe wasn't a thing. I was still generous here and there because I care about people, but very little intentionality behind it.
So like kindness is still a big part of your life. And,
sure. Yeah. It's not like my character drastically changed, right? But just my priorities sure did. And then I was in a relatively long-term relationship. And when that ended, I kind of started from zero again. And I was like, cool. Who do I want to be? What do I want to do? And that's when I started getting involved back with faith and with tithing in like kind of phase 2, which was in my early 20s. So
keep going. What now?
Yeah. So then phase 2, right, is like who do I want to be as my own like household, right?
Yeah.
And so like I have this kind of concept of legacy, which I'm not hugely like focused on legacy. It's not like part of my identity per se. But I do want to set a standard of who I want to be moving forward and who I want, what I want my family to represent and things like that.
Yeah, I do think that's interesting. Now I'll cut you off. Here
Sure.
I'm just letting you talk. But legacy, like I think there's definitely a very, very, very godly way of looking at legacy. I think sometimes I've noticed some people nervous talking about legacy because I think we have seen the world take it as a very selfish endeavor.
Sure.
And it's about your own glory and all of that. I love that line from Hamilton: legacy is planting seeds in a garden you never get to see.
Right.
Like legacy is about things that are living beyond you.
Sure.
And there's a book, it's behind me somewhere, that's talked about maybe one of the biggest issues of our day is that we went from thinking multi-generational to just our current moment. So we don't even it's common for parents to not even care about their kids.
Right.
It's common for parents to not think anything about helping their kids out financially. They're like, they'll figure that out. And there's some health to that, right?
Sure.
Where they got to figure out things.
Row your own boat. Yeah,
yes,
of course.
but also it's like, hey, can we just like take care of our, can we be a big oak tree that gives a lot of covering? So it's pretty fascinating to even read like early American history. Legacy, they were obsessed with. Like,
it's a big deal.
I want to have a huge legacy. And I think men need to have that drive because that drive is going to go somewhere. Right. What a healthy drive of like, I'm going to leave a legacy for the 4th and 5th and 6th generation.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing is legacy is typically a negative context. Most people think of legacy. They think of somebody who's got this like glory complex where they want to like find value in themselves by setting some standard for the future. And like, it ends up being kind of an ego trip a lot of the time. But as I've gotten older, I've started to appreciate that like there is something to legacy. There is something to setting a standard of how you're going to act, how you're going to behave, what you can leave behind for your children, not only financially, but also like lessons and just qualities, right?
Have you ever heard of David Brooks? He has this book called Second Mountain. So essentially what you're already saying is his book. So he's saying first mountain is like personal success and business and none of these things are bad. Like we all, when you're young, you have to climb these mountains.
Find an aspiration.
Yeah. And so those things are good. But then you realize, there's another guy who has that line, man, there's nothing worse than realizing you're climbing the ladder of success only to find your ladder's leaning against the wrong wall. You get to the top and go, oh, that's not what I thought this was supposed to be. Sure. And what a grace for the Lord to then open our eyes once we at least gotten over some mountain. And so the book's called Second Mountain because the second mountain is actually realizing life is about other people. Life is about me creating a legacy for the sake of my family, but also for the sake of my neighbor and our city, and for the kingdom of God. So, so you're saying 22 is a bit of that, like, okay, because from what I've heard of you, you've had your ducks in a row. Like it was that 14 to 22 wasn't useless. I mean,
it wasn't bad.
Yeah,
No.
It was, you're putting yourself in a good spot.
Sure.
But
Selfishly, but I did a really decent job of
nice
a goal, setting a goal and reaching it. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me more about 22 and beyond and just your own faith.
Sure. Yeah, so I got involved with a church. I was living at ASU at the time.
Cool.
I actually didn't go to ASU, but it turns out they let anyone live there. So
Nice.
I just moved there and hung out.
Amazing.
Because I wanted to hang out with people, my age and see what was going on. And so I got involved with Hope Church over there. They're like a campus church. And it kind of like realigned my focus on faith in general. And I started to kind of develop a real relationship with God. And that's where I kind of learned how to pray, mostly through trial and error, because again, I don't ask for help. So just mostly through trial and error, I kind of learned how to pray and how to like listen for what God was wanting for my life. It was still not super strong at that time, but I was kind of working towards it. And that's where I really decided that, hey, I don't want to live some life that I thought I wanted to live, like on Instagram where I'm traveling the world and don't have any connections with anyone, right?
Yeah.
I realized then, I was like, hey, I want a family, and I want something that's substantial and something that's real. And that starts with yourself, like what kind of person you are. And so you can't be hollow and selfish and grow something beautiful with your family.
Yeah.
And so I kind of started working on myself in a lot of ways, and it was perfect timing, as it always is in God's plan.
Yeah.
That's when I met my wife, and the two of us got together and really built something together from that point.
So how long have you guys been married?
Like almost 6 years.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, it'll be 6 years in April. So
Amazing.
5.5.
Yeah. And then how old is your baby now?
He's 5 months old.
Whew.
Yeah, he'll be 5 months old on Sunday.
How fun.
Super exciting.
Yeah. So do you want me to start asking these questions?
Sure. Ask me some questions.
I think this is some good context. So something I've noticed in our conversations is that you do budget.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So amazing. So what are some practical ways you've put generosity into your budget?
Yeah, so tithe is a big one, but it's no longer tithe for the sake of tithe. It's tithe with intentionality. It's like, cool, we've received this. Let's start by giving our best 10%, our first 10% to tithe. And so that's been really cool because it's expected and it's predictable, but it's with a genuine heart. It's intentional. And so we actually think about it, we pray about it, and we give our tithe, which has been kind of just the go-to for a while now. But I like that it's habitual. I feel like comfortable in the fact that like it's expected. It's not a conversation every month where it's like, are we going to do it or not? It's like, we are going to do it, and it's going to be good, and we're going to be intentional about it.
And there's nothing wrong with habitual, right? Like I think you're touching into something where a habit can become terrible.
Right.
But if it's the right heart, what a joy.
It's a habit I'm proud of. It's like, if you exercise regularly, it's like, you can be proud of that. That's cool. Like, same with tithe. Like, it's not mindless, it's mindful, but it's still habit. And so.
Yeah, I think somebody said if God didn't bless us with habits,
yeah,
we would be so overwhelmed every day.
Every day.
Like, I guess 80% of human activity is done by habit. Like, we don't think, should I brush my teeth today? Like, that's just a habit.
You have to,
there's so many stuff. Even when we're driving now, my mind's a million other places because the habit of, I know what to look, I'm driving smart, but not thinking about driving smart.
You forget how you got there. Yeah. It happens.
Right?
Yeah.
Can you get
Well, I mean, I think, I forgot what it's called, but there's some chemical in the brain, right? And it's responsible for like decision making. And when it runs out for the day, it's gone, and you need to sleep to kind of like refresh it. This would be better if I knew what it was called. But I heard about this years ago. And so you get decision fatigue really quickly. And the more things that you can automate, the more of that you have kind of in reserve for making better decisions and more decisions later. Right?
Yes.
Which is like, if you're at work all day and you're really pouring 100% into your work and you get home, you could be physically present with your family, but mentally absent. And you can't make decisions or be helpful. And there's more to that than just being tired. There's also like that decision fatigue element.
Yes. I think, man, most of life that's, how do I put this? I guess I'll put it in ministry world. A lot of times, like what I would do, like today, I did several things. None of it was hard. It's not rocket science. I knew the answers. It was just heavy. Some of the conversations, it was just like, there's a lot of emotions, and there was a lot of pain that I had to, someone literally before we got together. But yeah, so it's important to, anyways, I love going down that rabbit hole, but we won't.
We can talk philosophy forever.
Yeah, I know, right?
Tactics.
That's what I so enjoy talking to you. So tithe is definitely a part of your budget. Is there anything else? One recurring thing we've heard from some folks is margin and being able to like bless people randomly. Like, again, you don't have to be doing those things, but what is your kind of way of life?
We don't have a predefined set for that margin, right? there's always a margin in our budget. We always try to live below our means. We're not perfect. And quite frankly, when we first started budgeting, we used like a cash envelope system.
So did you do Dave Ramsey?
We did. Yeah, awesome. We did the Dave Ramsey thing full and through, paid off our debts and stuff. That was an arduous process. It was really worth it. So glad that we did it. And then over time, we've kind of relaxed a little bit, right? We're not still using cash envelopes, but the concepts are still there. But the idea is that we always live within our means.
Yes.
And we always have a little bit extra. And then we have that extra kind of goes into like a fund for, I call it like deferred maintenance fund, essentially. You know, if a car breaks or something like that, we have our emergency fund, and then we have like this extra kind of liquid fund, which is a little bit less, solid. Because like an emergency fund should be behind glass. Like if it's not an emergency, you shouldn't touch it, right?
I love that phrase, behind glass. That's
right.
So
break
helpful.
In case of emergency.
When me and my wife first got married, I'm like, why are we calling this emergency fund? We're tapping into it every single month,
right.
to make
so you need that
meet.
one in the middle, right? Which,
yes.
Again, dangerous habit. You can squirrel away and have like different levels where it gets too out of hand. So I recommend at least just two. But the idea is that we have this kind of like liquid fund.
Was this hard for you when you started this, or is this like totally your wheelhouse? You just found a system you love.
I love this stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I love numbers and organization. Like
got it.
It's big for me, so I love it.
Yeah.
But so that's always kind of there. And so if we have an emergency, something comes up, we can tap into that first.
Yeah.
But also it's not like spoken for. So if a need were to arise, if there's an area that we could do some good, we have some money to set aside for that. Not every month. Sometimes like there isn't margin, right? With the nature of owning your own business, sometimes we make a lot of money. Sometimes we don't make any or lose
Feast
some.
or famine, right?
It's really intense. Yeah. Highs and lows, which a lot of commission-based people are going to be really familiar with that. But that's okay. You just kind of have to figure it out. But when you do have extra, you should set some aside. And then beyond that, whenever we have something kind of like weird happen that's unpredictable and we're like blessed with money, ironically, there's always a need that comes up at the same time, and it just feels like God's kind of timing. So separate from tithe and separate from that, it's like, if somehow we come into some money, like a tax return we weren't expecting, or we sell a car or something like that, where we end up with like an extra chunk, there's almost always a need that comes up around that time. And so like when we've had stuff like that happen, oftentimes we'll put it off to the side and just like wait a little while, and something will come up. And it's like clockwork. And so
That's
it's
amazing.
like, cool, no problem. And we can kick that over there.
Do you find those the easiest to give when it was like, hey, this was kind of a windfall in the first place?
For sure. Yeah. Because like it's really easy to give away what you didn't know you had. Right. And so by treating it like, hey, this was a blessing to us, not like we earned it or like this is ours now, but like this was a blessing to us. And so like if we can share that blessing, it doesn't feel like the money came to us and then to them. It was like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, through you.
It's a little bit more
not just to you.
Fluid.
Yeah, and we've been so careful every step of the way to make sure we're not ever preaching prosperity gospel. So we're not saying, hey, give to the Lord and he'll. But there is a pattern of people when I talk to, when they budget and they're generous things happen to generous people,
It's true. Yeah, it's absolutely true. And actually, we dove into this yesterday in our Together group. We were talking about that. I think it all comes down to intentionality, because the prosperity gospel to me is super dangerous. In this concept of like, you give to the Lord and then you're going to get a return. Yeah, it's manipulative. So I think no matter what, if the Lord knows the number of hairs on your head, he knows your heart behind how you're giving. So if you genuinely give generously, I do believe that there's always or almost always a return, or at least like a large scale return,
Right.
Like since we've been generous, like I've noticed that our overall income for the year has gone up. It might not be like a 1-for-1 kind of measurable thing, but you can just feel the sensation of like motion.
Yes.
And so for me, that's huge. And that's like great, like proof in this whole statement. But it's also very dangerous to say like, cool, if you give to the Lord, he'll return tenfold. And so like, you're like running the math, like I can make this much, right? It's not, you're not going to
Which
Vegas
perverts
like
it from generosity to greed.
Yeah.
And then it's like, that statement's still true. The Lord doesn't want to bless a greedy person. Actually, to a greedy person, the most kindest thing the Lord can do is not give you money, because it will just tear you apart.
Right. Yeah. And actually, that brings up an interesting topic. So I was listening to a sermon over the weekend, and I heard the pastor say it's prosperity gospel like through and through, and it was a little bit off-putting. But he literally said, he's like, if you give to the Lord, if in 90 days you haven't seen a big return, like I'll give you your money back. And I was just like, okay, I've never heard that before. Like a literal like ROI, guarantee on giving, and it was shocking and a little bit like destabilizing for me, because I was like, hold on, like this is seriously bad information, but I can't tell you exactly why, because it's probably true.
Yeah.
But I think it always comes down to that, intentionality. So.
I have a friend who says that, and I would never be comfortable enough to say that. Not that I'd be worried about giving that money back, but it's just, there's...
I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it made me feel a little bit weird. Because I tend to lean more towards like a poverty gospel kind of mentality. Prosperity gospel's never been something that I really related to. But I don't know, it just feels really dangerous, right? Like this idea that you can kind of manipulate God. That's really how it hits me, where it's like, you give to him, he's going to give back. Like, let's test him. I know it says you can.
And Malachi, but I think it's a very specific...
That's a very twisted verse, I believe. And most people, I think, are taking that out of context.
Right.
And again, it's always heart attitude. Everything in faith is heart attitude. And so I think it would be... You have to be a much stronger person than me to push that with the right heart.
Yeah.
Because like, my heart is pure. I'm going to see what I can do with this. Like,
right.
I'm not pure enough to do that.
Yeah, I think giving is giving. I think if you're giving in expectation of return, it's no longer giving. It's something else.
Right.
So at its heart, it's always just an act of trust. No, that's fun. That's funny. I've heard that before, and I've had some friends say that. I said, I will never say that.
It's the first time I've ever heard
Not
it.
that I'm worried about our budget. Like people be like, oh, so you don't want to give that? They can have the money back. I just don't think that's a great promise. So
sure.
So okay. With that, so you mentioned prosperity, poverty gospel. I think those have been very helpful. I find it fascinating. Almost everybody that I've talked to at our church was like, oh yeah, poverty gospel is what I fall into way more. So. Yeah. Obviously there's people out there that fall for the prosperity, but maybe they'd be going to a different church if they did.
Sure.
that might be why I don't talk to people.
Yeah, maybe that's why I click so well with everybody.
Yeah.
I think, the poverty gospel for me is just like, it's easier to accept, in the same way that I don't like to accept help. I feel awkward about gifts. And so poverty gospel clicks with my personality because, hey, life is hard, right? We know life is hard. We expect it to be hard. And so this concept of it's going to be a grind and you're going to find value and purpose within that grind is comfortable. And so because of that mindset, poverty gospel really hits a chord with me because it seems easier. I don't deserve the love of Christ, nonetheless, like a prosperous life. So it'd be much easier to just say, like, I'm going to be stuck here because it
helps keep your expectations low.
Right.
And then therefore your disappointment is mitigated.
And I disappoint my wife with that all the time because I do that in every aspect of my life. I'm like, hey, I expect it to be a 2, right?
Yeah, you told me that when you guys had your baby. You're like, I'm expecting this to be miserable. Oh, it wasn't that bad.
Right. No, exactly. Yeah, I was like, I'm never going to sleep again. It's going to be super hard. And like, it hasn't been the easiest thing, but it was way easier than I expected because my expectation was not what most people's expectations going to be, right?
Yeah. So. A core leadership theme, and then we'll go to the next question. Core leadership thing a couple years ago for our church. You weren't here yet. We kept saying dazzled or disappointed.
Sure.
Like we should be, I think that's a helpful way to fight both poverty and prosperity gospel. We're going to ask big things from God. Now this isn't just, just for advancing the kingdom and all these things for our church. And I wanted us to pray such big prayers that if he answers them, we're dazzled. Like, oh my gosh, he actually answered this. Like, I thought this would never be possible. And if he says no, we're disappointed. But God cares for us in that disappointment because it shows that we were really hoping this would be a thing, And I think that's okay to give God that trust. To just put yourself out there.
It's just being vulnerable. I mean, it's like any relationship. You have to be vulnerable, and that's a scary one to be vulnerable with. Because getting your hopes up and then truly not knowing how it's going to go and still being joyful when it doesn't go your way is not easy.
Exactly. Yeah. So what are some obstacles you've had? Have you had any obstacles in like practicing consistently generosity in your life?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely. I think obviously when money is tight, which it has been on many occasions, it's really hard to be giving. Part of the reason that I stopped tithing, many reasons why, but I moved out at a pretty young age. I moved out like right before I turned 18. And I had to choose between like buying dinner and buying gas for my car or moving my pride aside and asking my parents for help. So I stopped giving, right? Because I literally couldn't afford anything. Now, I don't know how true that actually is, but I felt like I literally had to choose like between getting to work or buying food. And so I certainly wasn't giving 10% off the top, and I wasn't giving charitably to people on the street either, So there were definitely seasons that it was, in my opinion, impossible. Or at least that's how I felt. But since I've been, pursuing the Lord in phase 2 of my life, if you will, there have still been challenges for sure. There's been situations where goals that I had in mind couldn't be met if I was giving. And so I had to intentionally sacrifice those. Like, hey, we're almost there. This much would get us there, but we're going to give it away instead and be patient and wait another couple months, right? So there's that choice to be made.
Yeah.
The other thing is just being mindful the whole time. There was a phase a couple years into our marriage where we were giving, but the intentionality started to slip and I could feel it. And we had an opportunity to help somebody out who was really in need. And we set up like a recurring kind of giving to help them through this tough time. They had some medical issues. And so we were like, cool, we're just going to continually give. And we didn't put an end date on it. So after a while, I started to feel gross about it because it was just this automatic thing. And I don't know if they needed my help anymore. And eventually they were like, hey, we really don't need this anymore. You can stop. And I felt really like a bad steward. I was just like, man, I did this because it was easier to let it be than to actually pray about it and stew on it and see if this money could be better put somewhere else. If somebody else might be in greater need. I definitely became a bad steward, which I think is part of generosity. It's not just making a sacrifice and saying that you're going to do it. It's also then making sure that gift does good work for the kingdom. It's not just passive, which is why a lot of times we don't give to nationwide or worldwide organizations because it feels like it just kind of gets lost in the ether.
Sure.
It's 5 decimal places over to the right, our little number that we contributed. It makes no difference.
Right.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
But for me, it feels like the cop out.
So are you are you, hey, I don't do recurring either kind of guy? Because Derek wasn't either. Derek was like, you're not going to like this. I was like, what am I not going to like?
I do recurring. But I do recurring for special things. So I have recurring giving to past churches, people who are doing missions and things for past churches. I'm not part of that church group anymore for many reasons, but I still love those people and want to help them. I made that commitment. I stick with it. I'm okay with recurring giving, but it has to be intentional. And every month when that goes out, I'm like, cool, that was the right choice, right? So I don't have a problem with recurring.
We do recurring. What I do love is that I get an email from our giving platform. So it's a good way to be like, thank you, Lord. And I'm always checking my bank account, so I see when that happens. Sure. So because some people are like, I had no idea. It's like you don't look at anything.
Part of budgeting, you need to look at your bank account every once in a while. Yeah.
Yes, totally.
So,
So, has there been narratives you've had to fight? Narratives about money that maybe were common in your family of origin, or just even now that are considered also obstacles to staying? Because I really think generosity is like a daily fight.
Oh, it is.
Some of it's a habit, but some of it's just all of a sudden you can wake up and be like, wow, I'm a greedy person again.
Right. No, it happens so quick. So I think generosity has always been part of our kind of core as a family. But in general, my view of money as a kid was never good. My parents' relationship with money wasn't great. Still isn't great. There's a lot of struggle that came with that. And I remember hearing, as a kid that we had to choose between A or B all the time. And it always felt like money was really heavy and it had a lot of power in how happy we were going to be or what, our future was really relying on money. And so I always had this, that kind of miser mindset where I'd want to kind of collect and hoard. And part of having all my different accounts and things, we just discussed, is because it makes me feel better. I have a buffer to my emergency fund, whatever. So that way I never get to, and the narrative that I fought is trust. By being that way, I'm not trusting the Lord. I'm not trusting that what I have is enough. I'm not trusting that there will be food tomorrow. I'm trusting myself that I'm going to hang on to everything that I can. And when I've been blessed, I better keep that standard. I better never fall below that because now this is the new normal and we can't fail.
New normal. Right? Such a good point.
And so there's greed associated with that because now your new normal makes you feel like, oh, well, this is my standard. If it's not this good, it's not good enough anymore.
Right.
What a damaging thought to your character, right?
Uh-huh.
And I say that very easily in this conversation, but it doesn't mean that I don't think about that all the time.
Yeah.
I get comfortable and I'll make a comment with my wife about something. I'm like, oh, that's not good. I could do better. It's like, wait a minute. I'm blessed to even be where I am now. And I have to remind myself. And so,
a couple things on that is one, I have realized in recent days, I have 3 girls, realizing my narratives slip out. I speak to my kids in a certain way. And it used to be, I saw, one of my mentors was telling me how we talk about money with our kids is so important.
Yeah.
And so this is good for you because, I don't know how much Wesley is hearing any of these money narratives.
Probably not too much.
But like I would used to say like, oh, sorry, we don't have money for that. We can't afford that. We don't have any money, stuff like that. And some of that was like true, like if they saw the bank account, they'd be like, oh yeah, we really don't.
Math is still math.
Math is still math.
Yeah.
But somebody was, one of my mentors was like, no, just say, hey, you know what? We're living a certain way and we're saving for very important things. Therefore, we're not going to do that.
Right.
So not putting in them a scarcity mentality.
Right.
Right. It's just that actually that's not one of our priorities.
Right.
And so that really helped me. Okay. It takes a lot longer to explain that. It's easier to say like, we just don't have money for that. No, let's take a few breaths and say, hey, actually, here's what we live. We live off of 90% of what we make joyfully, which God can do way more with that 90 than I can do with 100. Mm-hmm. And we have priorities, and that's just not a priority, and that's okay. And your friends may want to buy that, and that's fine. Sure. We just have different values in our life, and this is what we're doing. God is taking care of us.
For sure. Yeah, and see, that's the difference between the scarcity mindset and kind of like the normal mindset. Mm-hmm. And that's like, that captures really quite well what I was trying to talk about. As a kid, it was always a scarcity mindset for sure. Mm-hmm. It was never quite enough, and it was always like, had to hoard and be careful. And I think, with all things related to parenting or explaining to other people, it's only hard if you're trying to be good at it, right? So it's hard to go slow and to really like put in that effort to say, hey, this is the narrative that we're going to believe it, legacy, and this is how we're going to convey it to our kids.
Yes.
Right.
I really think there'd be so much value in like couples getting away and just writing on the wall. What are our values that we're always going to say? We do this as an organization, as a church. It's just so important. Like one small one, we always tell our girls, I say, van camps, that's all I have to say. And they say, never give up. Yeah, that's right. Van camps never give up. And that stuff, like, it goes into their heart,
Yeah. My dad had this famous raising the bar speech, right? Like, here's the standard that is expected of the average person. Here's the bar that I've set for us.
Yes.
Personally, and we're going to meet this expectation.
Yeah.
So the raising the bar speech was a common theme, and it comes up all the time. And I noticed myself doing that all the time.
Yeah. Our football coach called it X+1.
Sure.
And I love that. So X is what everybody else is doing. Every other football team's doing X. We have to do the +1. So he'd be like, all right, 10 hills. Is that what everybody else is doing? Yes, sir. All right, +1. Let's do 11. It's like,
I love it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but that really does make a difference in your life.
For sure.
Did I cut you off though? Where I just had to stop you real quick to talk.
Oh, that's okay. We were just kind of going about narratives. I think just to expand on the narratives. Yeah, I grew up with scarcity mindset for sure. And then as we've kind of grown, that's one of the huge values that I've seen in like the change or the differences in background between myself and my wife. She grew up much differently than I did, and her perspective on money is like so different and so much healthier than mine. She just doesn't really care one way or the other. It's amazing. Yeah, I really wish I could absorb more from her. But we have conversations all the time, and I'm like, here's my expectations. Here's what we're going to do, this, and this. We're going to reach these goals by this time. And she's like, we're pretty great. You just hang out.
Nice. See, that's the perfect combo, though. Yeah. You can't have both of you or both of her,
Yeah. I'm like a level 11 extreme, and she's like a level 4. Like, she cares, but she's just chilling.
Nice.
And at least on finances, and it works out really well.
Yeah, that does work out well.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you... how has practicing generosity affected, like, your discipleship to Jesus? Because I do think, like, talking about how you grew up, I think a lot of us don't connect those dots, that this is actually me being a disciple. And this is me, every time I'm actually like learning something about the Father, right? And it's deepening me as a disciple. So yeah, how has generosity affected your discipleship with Jesus?
I think purpose is the best answer. As I've become more generous and more intentional with generosity, I have felt a really strong like sensation of peace with my finances that I never had before. That scarcity mindset is very real, and it's this like undertone in my life where I always feel like I got to work that extra hour. I have to, save that extra penny. And it's just this like chronic stress that like is pretty low level because it's so ingrained in who I am. And I'm feeling that kind of dull down. And with that comes like a sensation of like peace and like love, Yeah,
I love that.
Like kind of like a comfort, in the same way that like, when your spouse walks into the room, you feel like, oh, it's like comfortable, right? It's that same sensation. It's like you give and you can feel kind of this sensation that like the Lord is pleased with that. And it gives you this sensation of calm, or at least that's one of the ways that it's really kind of stood out to me.
Yeah,
I feel like it's one of the ways that I've also felt like a broadening of my communication with God. Like I'm pretty active mentally, and I always feel like I'm in my own way. I have a lot of trouble like hearing God's plan for me because I'm so busy. Like, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? Like I don't listen. I just talk. And so this is one of those ways where I give and I hear this like sensation of feedback that like this is okay, like we're good, and it makes me feel a lot more comfortable where I'm at, and a lot more like purposeful. Like going to work and doing this is valuable because I can do more than just take care of myself. And I can do more than just take care of myself and my family. I can take care of myself, my family, and someone else.
Yeah.
And it gives a lot more purpose to it. All the decisions that I've made, because everything in life is a decision. If I do work a little harder, stay a little bit later, I'm sacrificing time with my wife. I'm sacrificing time for my hobbies. Like there's a real sacrifice there. So am I doing that because I'm greedy and I want to reach a certain number and get rich? Or am I doing that because I can do more with this tool? Because money is a tool. And that transition from viewing money as like the key to what I need and using it as a tool, just like a hammer, has been monumental. And that's all through faith and giving.
Yeah, that's huge. I love it. It's a wonderful tool. It's a terrible God.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
What is your process? Because I know you've helped meet some needs in the past, and I'll just keep it at that. But what is your process in discerning if God's calling you to help meet a need?
A lot of times it's a feeling, right?
Okay.
Sometimes it's timing. Like money comes in that we weren't expecting out of the blue, a chunk. It's like, wow, that's amazing. And then all of a sudden a need arises. It's like, that's perfect timing. That's God's timing, right? That wouldn't happen any other way. So that feels right. But whenever there's a decision to be made like that, it's always my wife and myself talking about it and praying about it and kind of like meditating on it. But honestly, the feeling is really the thing. It's
Holy Spirit.
It's explicitly clear. It's clearer than any of the decisions I make for myself. It's just like, hey, we got to do this. This makes sense. It's right. Feels right. We do it. It's great.
Why do you think secret giving is so important?
Because it's the only kind of giving that is truly of a pure heart. Because if somebody knows about it, no matter how pure of a heart you have, you will be tainted. One way or the other. Either you'll start tainted because you're doing it for attention, or you'll become tainted afterwards, where you're like, oh, my ears are burning. Someone's talking about that thing I did, right? And so either way, if it's known, it's tainted. And therefore, you shouldn't even bother. Just go spend it on something for yourself. Right?
That's what Jesus says. He goes, you have your reward. Like, if you did it for their applause, your reward's gone in heaven.
Right.
Just enjoy it,
Which, again, I think is separate from tithe. Like we've talked about, for me, generosity and tithe are not the same. They're in the same wheelhouse, but...
So church words, some people would say tithe and offering. So offering is anything above and beyond 10%, and that's like... Because I think tithing is being generous.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, but
that's why generous. I like the offering phrase, maybe.
Yeah, tithing is a handshake with the Lord, right? Offering is like it's something altogether different.
Yeah, no, that's good. No, yeah, I think secret giving is so important. That's why when we were talking about in Acts 20, just like wolves in sheep's clothing, a lot of false teachers, people who are trying to manipulate other people and flocks, they do everything with trumpets. It's like, look how generous I am. Look how great I am.
Sure.
And without discernment, people go, you are great. You are, because they did a generous, like they did give a lot of money.
Sure.
But it's not for the Lord,
Right. And that's a weird area too, because the Lord can do great things with
He'll still use it.
Poor intentions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody goes out for glory and it's bad for their life, but that money might still do something really useful for the community. And so I think it can get blurry.
Yeah, he still redeems it, but let's make sure you have the right heart for it. I guess I would love to end practically, unless there's a couple other things you want to talk about. But how do you budget? Like if somebody's starting at zero, meaning they've never budgeted before. Like, what are some tools that have been helpful for you? What are some philosophies? Do you have percentages where it's like you should do this percentage for that?
I should have percentages,
but
nice. I don't.
Okay.
I did for a while, but I got lazy. We got a system that works and we got lazy, so it just is what it is.
But it's okay to be once the system's in place,
Once the system's in place. So our biggest thing is just being debt-free. It seems like a totally unreasonable mountain to climb, and it is. Student loans, car payments, credit cards, cell phones, everything has a payment now. And a lot of them are kind of disguised. Like cell phones is a great one because you don't I got my phone for free. It's like, you didn't, right?
Yeah.
You didn't. They own you for 2 years. So there's little things.
Do you do credit at all?
Occasionally, very rarely. So I have a mortgage on my house because I couldn't justify trying to wait decades to go pay cash for a house while paying rent. That's just silly. And in big emergencies in the past, we do have a credit card available. I'm not going to let the health of my family, take a hit because of my principles, right?
Yeah.
I'm not naive, but I do try to generally avoid debt. So I think getting debt-free is super important. I really enjoyed the whole Dave Ramsey conversation. Once you've listened to it for a while and kind of gone over it, there's a fixed amount of information in there. So it's not like it has to become a lifestyle. It's like after you've read, Total Money Makeover and you've gone on to the, I forgot the retirement book, but once you've read through both of those, like you probably got the basics.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing is just it's a mindset problem, not like a money problem. And so, Dave Ramsey always preaches the debt snowball. Start with your smallest debt and work your way up. And the thing that always gets you is percentage interest and things like that. You're like, I'm going to pay off my highest percentage credit card first and this and that. You're going to finesse it. And it's like, that's great. But it's kind of like working out.
But you need small wins.
You don't start with a marathon. You start with a small win, right? You start with a little exercise. So I really believe in that. That was huge for us. Just trying to increase the size of your shovel. If you have a big pile of snow and you're trying to get rid of it, a bigger shovel makes a much bigger difference than time or anything else. So I really believe that paying off your small debts so that you have a bigger chunk to throw at the bigger debts really helps. I think car payments are really deceiving because the payment always feels like it's worth it, but then you factor in the increase in insurance because the car's worth more, the increase in maintenance because the car's worth more. Cars are one of those exponential things where it doesn't look as big as it becomes really quickly. And I love cars, and they're detrimental for your finances. So,
per our conversations with our people, I think cars are literally the biggest thing that's kept people from being generous. In their minds, they're like, just the car payment plus my home payment, I'm barely breathing.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And that's, like Ramsey will preach your cars should not be worth more than 50% of your annual income. I believe it should be no more than 30% of your annual income.
Yeah.
Because cars are just, they depreciate and they need maintenance and it gets out of hand. So I think cars are huge. Avoid them if you can. If you're like me and they're your hobby, do cheap stuff.
Yeah, but at least you can flip, you know how to fix it. That's helpful.
Yeah, for me, it's a hobby as well as whatever. So it works out pretty well. And then the other thing is just... truly sticking to a budget and believing in the process long enough that you can actually see some return. Because being a hero and going scorched earth and eating beans and rice and putting every cent you have towards debt or towards savings, it sounds great, but I've never met somebody who doesn't burn out doing that.
Yeah.
We tried that, and after 3 months, I just didn't care anymore. I was like, I don't care. If I can't drink coffee,
life is terrible.
If I can't eat a sandwich when I want one, what is the point in doing this that I can reach some arbitrary goal? Yeah.
That's for all the practices, right? It's pray as you can, not as you can't. Sabbath, start somewhere small. You'll get there. If you try to burn, consistency is way more important than intensity.
Yep, absolutely. And then accountability. I think if there was one thing that would change finances forever, it's accountability. Whether that be with your spouse, whether that be with a family member, whatever. When I did it, I was really transparent with my finances with my brother. And I was like, look, here's where I'm at. Here's where I'm trying to reach. And he would kind of just check in periodically and see where I was at. And I knew he would. And so I was like, cool, I'm not going to lie to him. So I have to actually reach some goals within reason. Hey, I failed this week. I didn't reach my goal. We decided to go to the movies instead. But I'm honest with you, and we're back on track now. And that just kept me going because my wife and I build each other up, but we can also talk each other into, spoiling ourselves now and then, right? It's pretty easy.
We deserve this.
We've been working hard. So I think having that outside accountability is huge.
I wish we could normalize money conversations.
I think we can within small communities. I think within our church, we totally could. I think as a society, it's really tough.
That's a good point.
Because society is literally structured to kind of distract you from money. Because if you were really aware of it, you'd realize how much of a toll it takes on you. And that's bad for business. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I just found most people, they just never had genuine conversations about money with anybody.
Sure.
And it's you need, this is why we have together groups. It's maybe you guys trust another. It takes a while, but trust each other over a long period of time. Let's start talking about that, Right.
But again, long-term relationships are rare.
Yeah.
As well. And so there's a lot structured in there, right?
Very
you can't be honest with somebody who you don't know, and you can't know somebody you don't spend time with. And you can't spend time with people that you don't intentionally spend time with, because you don't really choose your friends typically.
Yep.
But you can.
Yep. It goes back to in January, we said the theme this year is how to make friends and love other people. And we said the 4 steps of making friends are proximity. Be around them for a while, like a long time, actually.
Like longer than you think.
Longer than you think. And then second is vulnerability. But you can't be vulnerable, right? You're weird if you like, hi, I have these problems.
I have problems. Yeah.
Whoa. Okay. Let's just hang around each other a little bit, learn each other's names,
Sure.
Then vulnerability, slowly but surely. Then practice. So you're doing the practices together, being generous with each other, hospitable, and then you begin to live on mission. Then you start to do things together for the sake of others.
Sure.
But there's a process there, and you're so right. I mean, it takes a lot of humility and just a lot of time, and we want to have our cake and eat it too, right? We want to just get it right away, and that's the money of less. That's what I love about money. Like, it's such a lesson on life.
It is. Yeah, it's all connected. It's all the same.
It takes a lot of discipline, responsibility, planning, saying no to good things, to say yes to great things. Compound interest, if you put things in over time, has huge dividends down the road, but not right away. Like, that's so true for all of life.
Absolutely. I mean, that's to wrap it up well. I mean, that's one of the things that Ramsey preaches all the time. He's like, live like no one else will now, so that you can live like no one else can later. And not only is that true, but it's kind of encouraging to say, like, hey, I'm not sacrificing because I'm trying to hurt myself. I'm sacrificing because I have like a greater kind of purpose in the future.
Yeah.
And it really does work.
And I will close with this. We ask a lot of our people to say, hey, like, let's host people. Let's make peace. Let's forgive. I have found those who are debt-free or have already fought that money battle have the emotional capacity and ability to do these other practices. I think sometimes people, they're just, they just can't breathe. Like, the world is crashing down on them. They have so much credit. A lot of it's self-imposed, self-inflicted.
Sure.
And so, like, you're not in a good spot to, like, even come to church in a healthy manner. Now, the Lord has grace, and I'm not saying if, you're in debt, don't come to church. I'm just saying it's such a worthy fight because it helps you with all the other fights.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Helps with marriage. It helps with everything.
All of it. Because it comes down to communication, intentionality, being vulnerable, making sacrifices together. It's all kind of connected. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, man, for spending some time. We are big fans of you. The Van Camp household, big fans of the Kuhns.
Wow.
And we're so grateful for you, how you lean in. Something I do want to honor about you, something that meant a lot to me. This was months ago. You pulled me aside and were just like, hey, I noticed this about your leadership and this, and I'm thankful for that. And that just meant a lot to me, that you just took time to say, this is what I'm noticing from the outside. Thank you for doing this, this, and this. So I feel like you have a lot of meaningful conversations. You're an honoring person to everybody in the room. I know that your group speaks very highly of you behind your back. So we appreciate you, man, and we're better because of you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on today.
Absolutely.